Hey guys, this is Energy, and this video is about our new Sinai Training Miz, and I am making this video in August of 2023, and it's about the first version of the Sinai Training Miz. So the objective of a Training Miz file in our group and on our server is to have a Training Miz run for a long time on the server, basically permanently or repeatedly, as it starts up automatically from time to time. And the intent of it is to offer different prepackaged situations in which you can train, either air to air, air to ground, or a variety of other flight skills like night flights, instrument landings, AAR, and so on, either alone or with a group, impromptu, without necessarily preparing a separate mission. And so therefore the file itself and the Miz itself is fairly complex. And with the F10 menu, you can change things. You can spawn enemies, you can spawn friendlies even, you can spawn targets of various kinds. You can find targets, you can mark targets. And so what I'm going to do today is take you through what I put in, what I coded in this Training Miz file and what it does. And I mostly do this by taking you through the F10 menu, because that is how you would manipulate things. So with that, this is the Sinai map. This is a composite picture. It's not a picture that's easy to get when you're in DCS. You have to pan up and down. You see in yellow the steering points. We'll talk about these. These are steering points that are in common with the F16, the F15, and the A10. Although the A10, I'm not sure can actually really use them, but they're loaded. And then you can also see two tankers, Arco 1 and Arco 2, and Magic Arco 1, sort of over the Suez Canal, Arco 2, largely in front of the coast of Israel, and then Magic sort of sideways over the Sinai Desert. So they start up automatically when the Training Miz starts, and they should be running at all times. They may at some point RTB when they're out of fuel and then come back. But since they're pretty close to their bases, that should work and they shouldn't misbehave. There are no other tankers or no other AWACS standard on this map, unlike, for instance, the Caucasus map or the Syria map in the past. In this case, if you want more tankers or more AWACS, you're going to have to spawn them, and we'll get to that, how to do that. Okay. So I'm going to take you through first talking about what bases we have, where we are based, where we have slots. As I said, we're going to take you through the F10 menus, air to air, air to ground, talk about tankers and AWACS. A few words about Kneeboards, and then back to the F10 menu to talk about mission restart. That's really not anything that's on the mission. That's really how you restart the mission and restart different versions of the mission, different weather versions. But let's get started with the bases, and let's talk about where we have slots. We have 4 bases. 3 of these are shared by the, or 2 of them, I should say, are shared by the F15s and the F16s and the A10s. And then one of them is an F16 and F15 base, and one of them is just an A10 base. But we're starting out with Salihyah, and I may have butchered up the name. That is really our main base. That is our new Kutaisi, our new Incirlik, to be respectively equivalent in Caucasus and in Syria, or if you want to go back further in the Persian Gulf, it was things like Al-Minad. So this is our base, fairly central in the map. It's a large air base with big runways, with functioning ILS on runway 2L, with a lot of slots where you can get A10s, F15s, F16s. And from there you can reach a variety of points of interest. And so that's going to be our main base. The second one to talk about, you can see the green star there in Israel, is basically Tel Aviv's airport, Ben Gurion. It's not really what I would have preferred. I would have preferred to have a real military base like Ramat David or so, but I don't really find one on this map that serves that purpose and is far enough north. So I've used Ben Gurion, which is a fairly large airport, again, many runways, well provided with ILS. Normally in the real world, this would be a busy airport. And of course it is not really, or not at all, in our Miz file, but at least for now, it is not. And so that is our second, again, A10, F15, and F16 slots on this airport. The third airport, or the third base, is Fayed. Fayed is a little bit further south than Salihyah and is really close to the Suez Canal. Is almost on it. It is only an A10 base, and the reason I have the A10 base there is because it is close to one particular feature on the map, the tank battle. We'll talk about that, or the ground battle, and it's also a little bit closer to one of the main big, really armed bombing ranges, Bir Hassana. So we'll talk about those. But so that's a little bit further south. Large air base, runs opposite from Salihyah, which has runways north-south. This runs east-west. Good size air base. And then last but not least, very different. So all these three air bases that we've talked about so far are really at low elevation. They're typically basically just about sea level. The last one here, St. Catherine, lies in the southern edge of the Sinai in the mountains, is at 4,500 feet of elevation, or 4,200 feet of elevation. A short runway. And so this lies in the middle of a lot of action, but is also a challenging short airfield. Tough. You can land on it. We've done it, but you got to get it right. You don't have a lot of leeway. You can't overshoot too much of the runway. You got to put it down and you got to stop. So it's an interesting, different runway, nice little tactical situation. So this is a picture of St. Catherine, and it is surrounded by mountains, not far from the little town of St. Catherine. Okay, so those are the four here in green stars. You can see them on the map. The four bases where we have slots. Again, 3 of them for F-16s and F-15s, 3 of them for A-10s. The A-10 Fayed only, or Fayed is A-10 only, and St. Catherine is F-16 and F-15 and no A-10s. All right. So let's talk about the F10 menu and what are things that we can do in the F10 menu. And you see that I'll cover air-to-air, air-to-ground, tankers, and AWACS. So the menu, you know how to access it from your plane. Hit the F10 key in the radio menu. You can see again, as I showed there in yellow, the yellow line around it, air-to-air, air-to-surface, long-range tankers and AWACS, and then the mission stuff. And we're first going to talk here about air-to-air, the first option. So that one too splits in many different sub-options or sub-menus. Under air-to-air, you can have red AI patrolling, red AI air-to-air attack, red AI CAS, combat air support, or blue AI guardians with their respective sub-menus. Let's clarify what are each of these. So a patrolling, the AI patrolling aircraft remain in their assigned area, which is either a national airspace like Syria or some portion of international airspace. And in this particular case, we also have some that you can spawn in areas that are usually fairly quiet and where they may just be sneaking up. Maybe they shouldn't be there, but they are there. And they patrol in a certain zone, and they're also protecting a certain zone. And these two zones don't have to be the same. But in our case, you'll find out that they largely overlap. And if you enter the zone that they are protecting, they will respond aggressively. They will attack at that point. And they will pursue you, even if you exit that zone again. So those are patrolling aircraft. The attacking aircraft, on the other hand, they don't linger in any zone. When they're spawned, they pursue you immediately, or they attack immediately. So they go right away towards a zone that is an enemy zone for them, a friendly zone for us, and they will attack any aircraft that they can find around them. In both cases, both the patrolling and the attack version of this menu, you can unspawn the aircraft. I build in some delay. What I don't want people to use this unspawning option for is to unspawn them just before they're going to get killed, to avoid getting, to stay out of trouble. You can unspawn them and there's going to be some delay, typically like a minute before they actually disappear. So if you're merged and you can't get out of that merge by unspawning them, or at least it will take you a minute that you're going to have to survive before they disappear. There's some drones that can be spawned under the attack mode, the second mode, and they can be unspawned. After all, they don't do anything. They don't shoot anything. They're really just there for you to practice positioning yourself behind an aircraft or getting in position to shoot. The third option is the Red Air Combat Air Support. These are aircraft that make ground attacks against targets, and the targets are friendly to us. So you need to stop them before they get to that target. And then we have blue Guardians, or airplanes that we can spawn that will protect us, or more specifically, they'll attack enemy aircraft when the enemy aircraft enter a certain zone that the friendly aircraft are protecting. So we're going to cover each of these now in a bit more detail. And I know this is, as I had said in the beginning, relatively complicated. The Miz file offers a lot of options. And although there are many options, I think once you look at it, you'll see that this is not, while it comes across as complex, there's a lot of repetition here. So let's look at this first one, the Red AI patrolling. So you may remember in the Caucasus map, we had a large number of airplanes, enemy fighters, patrolling essentially Russian airspace on the north side of the map. And they were always there unless you unspawn them. So now in this map, this is not the case. They are not spawned, they're not there unless you spawn them. And once you spawn them, they stay there until the end of the mission or until you unspawn them. The unspawn option applies to all of them. So you can spawn several groups of them. We'll talk about this in a minute. But when you unspawn all of them in one shot. So let's look at the different groups that you can spawn. The first one is in Syria. So that's the red one there. So you can spawn a patrolling combat air patrol, Red AI in that area. The second one is in the Suez Strait. So the Suez Strait is this body of water that goes to the Suez Canal, or the city of Suez, and then to the Suez Canal from the Red Sea. And obviously that is Egyptian airspace, but you can spawn enemy aircraft there. And those enemy aircraft, and we'll get to that in a minute, they would be flying over some ships. And that may be the purpose of that. But at any rate, you can spawn them there. You can spawn them in the Mediterranean, fairly north, about 200 to 250 miles north of our base in Salihyah, and that's here on the top of the map. And there, they will be hanging out there in international airspace and leave you alone unless you get into an area close to a Russian flotilla that we'll talk about. You can spawn them in the Red Sea, further out, and some of this is international airspace between on the right on the map, so on the eastern side, Saudi Arabia, and on the right and on the left on the western side, Egypt. So you can spawn them there, and you can spawn them coming out of that Nubian southwestern desert, the Nubian desert. That leads into further into Africa. There too, we're sort of simulating as if there is a threat from from Nubia, largely that area, geographic area, and so you can spawn them there. So these are different places, 5 different places where you can spawn patrolling aircraft that will not immediately attack you. They will fly around, they will fly in patterns that are randomly generated, and they will attack you if you enter certain zones. You're going to have to find out what they are. Let's go to the second one, which is the attack. And remember what I said, when you spawn these, they attack immediately. They don't patrol, they don't hang out, they go immediately for enemy aircraft that they can find. And you can spawn these from 3 areas. You can spawn them coming in from the Mediterranean northwest of the port of Fayed. The port of Fayed is where the Suez Canal ends into the Mediterranean. So you see the yellow arrow there, so they can come in from there. And so if you want to practice air-to-air combat, starting from Salihyah, from our main base, this is a good option for you to spawn some enemies. You can spawn them from Syria. See the red arrow, and they come down towards really the main area of Israel, towards the Dead Sea there. And you can spawn them from southwest Libya, from the direction of a point in geography that's called the Dakhla Oasis. So you can think of these as, some Air Force associated with or aligned with Libyan rebels or so, but you can spawn them from there too. That is pretty far away from any airport we have. So that gets interesting. And I'm sorry, on this map I start to show a couple of additional possible AWACS and tankers, but they're not there unless you spawn them. And we're going to talk about that later. But the intent of this chart is to show you from where you can spawn air-to-air attack aircraft. And anytime we do this, you can spawn either a pair of Su-30s, a pair of MiG-29s, a pair of MiG-25s, or a pair of Su-30 drones, and the drones are totally unarmed. Okay. So that covers so far what you can do in air-to-air in terms of patrolling aircraft, in terms of attack aircraft that are air-to-air attack. And now let's look at the options to spawn combat air support enemy aircraft. And you can do that from 2 regions. And in each of these, you can spawn them either as 2 Ka-50 helicopters or as 2 Su-25 ground attack aircraft, or you can activate both options and spawn both. And as you can see, you can also unspawn these if you feel a need to do that. And again, I hope I remember this right. I think there's a little bit delay built in here as well. The first place from where you can spawn them is from, and this is wrong. I'm sorry. This is really the second option. It is from Jordan. So although the red square or rectangle is there around F1, what I show here as an arrow is really F2. So coming in from Jordan, the red bandit, coming in on a ground attack on Mizpeh Ramon, which is an area in Israel. By the way, you'll see in a lot of menus between square brackets, MGRS high-level coordinates, so XU78 refers to a certain area. And the second one is this attack from the western desert to Abnub city. So again, I've got the colors of the arrows switched around. Okay. Last but not least, you can spawn friendlies, and these friendlies will fly and won't do anything. They'll stay in a zone unless an enemy aircraft enters the zone that they protect, and then they will go after the enemy aircraft and try to kill it. And we can spawn these from 2 areas, either in Israel, in Sdedev, which is not far from Ben Gurion, and they'll stay there. So that is a good opportunity or a good option for you to use if you attack Syria, and if you're coming back pursued by enemy aircraft, you may get some additional help as you get closer to home. Or they get spawned around St. Catherine, a little bit more to the west, and protect that area. Okay. When you spawn them, they'll keep flying until they're exhausted, until they're out of fuel, or until you unspawn them. And I think in this case, they unspawn immediately. So that is air-to-air. So we talked about air-to-air patrolling aircraft that we can spawn, that patrol until you enter a zone, air-to-air attack, that attack immediately as soon as you spawn them, combat air support runs or attacks that you can spawn and that you would have to defeat, and then blue AI Guardian protectors. That is the first menu and the first set of options as to what you can spawn in air-to-air activities on the Training Miz. Let's go to air-to-ground, where there are at least as many options. So in air-to-ground, we find bombing ranges, enemy convoys, a ground battle scene, sea training ranges, and enemy cargo ships. What are each of these? A bombing range is an area that has stationary targets. And so as you approach, these targets don't move. Now, as soon as you attack, some may move. If you hit a target and kill it, a nearby target, a nearby tank, may move away. So if you have several targets marked and you're ready to attack several targets, if you attack one, don't count on them necessarily staying in the same place. Some of these bombing ranges, particularly those closer to Salihyah, where it's easier for us to train, may have little or no defense, and some have quite a bit of AAA or SAMs. And some can be spawned with more or less anger, with stronger SAMs or less SAMs, and we'll give an example of that. So bombing ranges, areas where there are stationary targets. By the way, these targets are spawned in these ranges, in these areas around, in these ranges, in random locations. So if you find an SA-9 on a certain bombing range, and you go back the next day and go take out the same SA-9, you're going to have to look for it again because it won't be in the same place. Enemy convoys are or should be constantly on the move. Opposite from bombing ranges, when you shoot them, or when you either shoot close to them or you actually hit a vehicle, they have a tendency to actually stop or scatter and then stop. Some of these convoys are not armed, some of them are quite armed, so approach with care. The ground battle range has nothing on it at all unless you spawn it. So when you spawn it, we'll show that in a minute, then a column of blue and red friendlies and enemy armored and armed vehicles will be spawned, and they will approach each other and start a battle. And so the intent there is that you intervene and that you create a situation that's advantaged for our friends, of course. And that's a situation that is really very difficult for the F-16s, and I imagine for the F-15s as well. But it's really set up for the A-10s, and therefore Fayed is chosen as a base close to that area if A-10 drivers are interested in trying that. Sea training ranges, there are 3 of them. They are completely empty until you use the F10 system to spawn SAMs or SAM installations on them. And the menu will allow you to spawn a single vehicle, a multi-vehicle, or clusters of SAMs. And with a cluster, I mean a SAM that's typically a long-range SAM surrounded by short-range SAM and AAA to defend the long-range SAM. So within the seed ranges, when you do this spawning, it is spawned generally in a random location, although the code takes some of the geography and the topography into account, but largely it's random. So seed ranges. And I think you're familiar, most of you are familiar with these seed ranges. I've been using the same, basically the same code since the Persian Gulf. And in this map, the enemy cargo ships that are here are in the Gulf of Suez. So that's the same place where you can spawn patrolling fighters, by the way. So you can use those, and you can mark those ships. And by the way, there is a Russian flotilla, mission, a missile, a cruiser, protected by frigates, if I remember right, on the northwest corner of the map, and they could be a challenge, and you can go find them. Steering points here are very important with these ground targets, and this is a list of steering points that you will find built in to the kneeboards of the A10s, of the F16s, and the F15s. So you will find this list of steering points back, and these steering points are preloaded into the jets. So they're color coded. There's, whatever you want to call that color, orange there is bombing ranges, yellow are convoys, and green are seed ranges. And so those steering points are, of course, not exact points of targets. They are points of a midpoint of a range, a midpoint of where a convoy runs around, so you get close to it, and the midpoint or a geographic reference in a seed range. So it means that the targets are not on that steering point, but they should be, or they can be, near that steering point. You still have to go look for them. Okay. And then there are different things that you can do with each of these features. So for instance, in the Bir Hassana targets, a range about 60, 70 miles from Salihyah, you can read it there, you can remove all the red units. And now Bir Hassana simply becomes a blue airfield. There's no more bombing range, there's no enemy there. You can respawn everything. So things get recreated, again, in random locations around Bir Hassana, up to, you see for this particular situation, up to an SA-13. You can go more severe and include SA-15s and SA-19s in this particular range. You can find out, F4, query the range, rules of engagement status. You can find out whether or not they're going to fire or not, and you can change it. You can ask them to hold fire or fire at will. So if they hold fire, obviously you can train more things at lower altitude or slower. But typically you will want them to be able to fire. You can also smoke targets, flare them, or illuminate them. Illuminate them is when you drop basically high lumen flares, high altitude that comes slowly down over the targets. They're fun to do at night. It's just interesting to look at. Okay, so these options are not the same in all the ranges. So for instance, in the Taba roadblock, which is in Egypt, but right there in the strait, in the Gulf of Aqaba, which is the other Gulf that comes off the Red Sea, not the Gulf of Suez, but the other one that goes to the port of Aqaba. And Taba is close to the port of Aqaba. In that range, you can respawn all the elements. You can also spawn a helicopter, which will stay in the air for an hour, and you can deal with that. And there too, you can smoke and flare. So you just go look, play with them, find out what you can do. One that I want to highlight is if you like to see things blow up, take on the Damascus targets. Very nice secondary explosions. I would recommend you drop a cluster bomb. Largely one or two or so are enough. You don't have to throw a lot. And then you can look at how it all blows up there over time. So have fun with that. So again, these correspond to the steering points, and the steering points are listed on this list that is going to be part of your, or that is already part of your kneeboard, built into the mission file. So you don't have to add it to your own collection of kneeboards. It's in there as you enter the server. I mentioned enemy cargo ships. They are in the Gulf of Suez, and you can see that the track or the range where they approximately are is not that different from the range where you can also spawn patrolling red enemy aircraft. So the ships will always be there. You can smoke them to find them if you have a hard time finding them. And furthermore, as I had mentioned, there is a Russian flotilla. You can see the red area on the northwest side, the top left side of the map, and the top left side of the map, if you fly there and you go and attack these ships, be prepared to be fired at. Okay, now support. How do we get support from tankers? In AWACS, you could see that some of the targets are far away, and we want, if it's air to, or also some of the air-to-air options are far away, we want AWACS support and we want tanker support. And so we have a number of things we can do there. The first one that we can do is we can spawn Texaco. So Texaco 1 actually flies very close to our main base and close to Fayed. And Texaco is a low and slow boom tank. All the tankers are boom tankers, by the way. There's no basket tanker on this map. Texaco is a low and slow tanker, really set up for the A10s to practice aerial refueling on. Or if somebody in an F16 or F15 wants to make things a little bit more challenging, you can go tank on it. Since it is at low altitude and flies at a low speed, it makes tanking a bit more challenging. Now the rest, the shell tankers here, you can spawn over these different outlying areas. When you spawn any of these tankers, they will stay, or they'll try to stay active as long as they can until they fall out of the sky. And in some instances, if the code works properly, they may even get respawned at that point. So basically, as long as the Miz file runs and until the Miz file is reset, they should be there. The first one is over the Mediterranean, Shell 2 and 3, closer to this Russian flotilla that I had mentioned before. So you can see there the thicker green arrow pointing to the northwest of the map, and Shell 2 and 3. A second pair of tankers you can spawn in front of the Lebanon coast, and so they can support you as you do work in Syria. A third set is far out over northwest Saudi Arabia, and they can serve you as a source of fuel if you do, for instance, seed exercises in the Almond Mountain seed range that you can see there on number 34. Or if you're going to attack enemy aircraft over the Red Sea. Shell 6, 8, and 9, I'm sorry, is over the more southern part of the Nile Valley on the bottom side of the map and can support, when you're working out there. So these are all options of tankers. And if you were to select all of these options, then all of these would spawn. So they're additive if you want. You can spawn 2 and 3, and you can also spawn 4 and 5, and they would both show up. And the radio menus and tack hands and so on, we'll get to. It's going to be in your Kneeboards, and it's in the briefing. Okay. Now you can also have additional AWACS support. You can spawn a Dark Star along the Lebanon coast, exactly like Shell 4 and 5. And on the southern part of the Nile. And it's important to know that that is really an or. You can either spawn Dark Star in one location or in the other. If you have spawned, for instance, if you have spawned Dark Star in front of the coast of Lebanon, and then you spawn it again over the southern Nile, it will disappear over in front of the coast of Lebanon. So you can only have one Dark Star, and wherever you've spawned last is where it shows up, and it will automatically disappear. If you were to have spawned it before, it will disappear. Okay. So I know it's kind of complicated. It looks like a lot of options, but you're not going to use all of these at the same time. But for instance, with the kind of options we have here, what you can do now is you can spawn some patrolling aircraft, say for instance over Syria. You can go after a Damascus target, which forces you to go into Syria because it's going to be steering point 44. And in order to do that, and maybe you do that from our base in Salihyah, it's a pretty long flight. Maybe you want Shell 4 and 5 out there so you can refuel, and you would want Dark Star out there to help you with these patrolling aircraft. So in other words, what I'm telling you is that with the use of various menu options, you can build yourself a bit of a scenario where you can try more complex things. Or you can just take off from Salihyah and go to the nearest bombing range there in Port Said, unarmed, and just practice dropping JDAMs or so. Okay. All right. Kneeboards. I've mentioned this a couple of times now that there are kneeboards. I've mentioned this one already, so you can see there are kneeboards, or there are steering points numbered all the way to 44. However, 25 to 30 is not used for the F-16s. Those are used as mark points. And then the color code I mentioned to you before. The only two airports that have steering points are our main base, Salihyah, and there's also a steering point 12 DME towards runway 02 of the same airbase. So I do that to allow newer pilots to practice with approaches and landings. However, Fayed and the Tel Aviv airport, Ben Gurion, you're going to have to find with TACAN. St. Catherine doesn't have TACAN, so therefore I've put a steering point on it. That's steering point 35. Okay. Sorry, this map is part of the kneeboards. So we've looked at it, but so just as a visual reference. These airport information sets are part of the kneeboards. And then there is also a written 2-page kneeboard that contains information that's also largely in the briefing. So if you hit escape in DCS and you click on briefing, you'll find essentially the same information. But it gives you a set of frequencies, coordinates, and so on. How do you call a tanker? What TACAN do the tankers have? Where are these bombing ranges? At least it gives you high-level MGRS coordinates, although there's also steering points, right, as I mentioned before. So it gives you a bunch of information that you can quickly reference for use, okay? Last, then, is the mission restart. So the mission, as I have it today, runs for a set number of hours, and then it restarts itself. It's my objective, my aspiration to change that so that it will do that, but it will never do it while you're on. But I haven't had a chance yet to do that. It takes a little bit of figuring out how to do that, but I think it's possible. So for now, it is possible that the mission would restart automatically while you're on the server. And it will give you warnings, 15 minutes out, 10 minutes out, 5 minutes out. And in order for you to make it possible to find out how much time is left, you'll see that the first menu item there is remaining time in mission. So you can find out how much time is left on the Miz file so that you're not likely to be surprised. And then there are 6 ways that you can restart the mission, 3 for day and 3 for night. And they correspond basically to different atmospheric conditions. So daytime, we have a clear, we have a clouded, and we have a sandstorm. And then for night, we have a clear night with full moon. We have a broken clouds with full moon. And we also have a fully overcast without a moon, so it's really dark. So those are ways in which you can restart the Miz file to give you different atmospheric conditions, but nothing else on the Miz file changes in terms of targets or things you can spawn. That's the overview, and I know this was not short, but as I mentioned before, it's a fairly complex Miz file that gives you a lot of options, a lot of things that you can combine or that you can spawn, that you can activate, and opportunities for you to train by yourself or in group. We're a pretty small group, so if you have questions, reach out. Drop me a note in Discord. It is without a doubt there's something that's not going to work, that has a flaw in it, has an error in it, probably multiple things. I haven't been able to test everything. If you find something that doesn't work, doesn't seem to work right, let me know. Then it probably has to get fixed. And of course, since this is DCS, I'll fix that within 2 weeks, right? But if something doesn't work, do me a favor, let me know. I think we have a bugs channel in the Discord, so let me know. So hope this is useful to you. But at any rate, if you want me to take you through the Miz file, you want me to fly with you in the Miz file, demonstrate some things, happy to do that. All right. Thanks, guys, and have fun flying.